What if one miscalculation could wipe out your entire savings? The BRRRR method is everywhere right now, but there's a major flaw that trips up most first-timers, especially at the tail end of the process. And it's easier to fall into than you might think. Keep watching to avoid the number one misstep that drains investors' profits. The truth is, most people don't realize what they're getting into until it's too late. The method sounds simple, but there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. So before you start dreaming of easy passive income, let's break down what BRRRR actually is, why it's so popular, and what you really need to know to succeed. The BRRRR method has become a go-to strategy for new and experienced real estate investors alike. BRRRR promises to recycle your cash purchase after purchase if you nail every step. The acronym stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and then repeat. The process sounds straightforward. You buy a property, renovate it to boost its value, rent it out for steady income, refinance it to pull out your original investment, and then use that money to acquire your next property. On paper, it looks like a repeatable formula for building a rental portfolio and growing your wealth. The appeal is obvious. Instead of saving up for years to buy your next property, you're using the equity you've created through renovations to fund your next deal. The idea of turning one down payment into a chain of income producing properties is super hard to resist. It feels like a shortcut to financial independence. You're not just waiting for slow appreciation or hoping for the market to rise. You're actively forcing value into your investments and then leveraging that value to scale up faster. It's easy to see why so many people are drawn to this approach. But here's the reality check. Just because the steps look simple doesn't mean the execution is. Many investors report running into funding and rehab hurdles that can completely derail a deal. The BRRRR cycle depends on everything going according to plan, not with just the property itself, but with your financing, your contractors, your timeline, and the rental market. If any of those pieces don't work out, you can end up stuck, unable to move on to the next property, or even worse, losing money on the deal. Let's walk through a typical scenario. You find a fixer-upper in a promising neighborhood, the numbers look good, and you're confident that you can add value with some updates and renovations. You buy the property, start the renovations, things seem to be moving along pretty well, but maybe the rehab takes longer than expected or the costs start to climb. Unexpected plumbing issues, city permits, or delays with the contractors. Now you're over budget and behind schedule. Once the work is finally done, you list the property for rent, but it sits on the market longer than you planned, or you have to drop the rent to attract tenants. Your projected cash flow shrinks. When it comes time to refinance, you might hit another snag. The appraiser doesn't value the property as high as you hoped, or maybe lending standards have tightened since you started. This happens a lot. You can't pull out as much cash as you put in, or you're stuck with a higher interest rate. Suddenly, the whole repeat step is out of reach. Instead of rolling your money into a new project or a new house, you're left with less cash than you started with, and a property that's barely breaking even. These just aren't worst case scenarios. They're common roadblocks that catch even well-prepared investors off guard. The BRRRR method's popularity has exploded, especially online, but the stories you see are often the exception. They're not the rule. Most people don't talk about the deals that didn't work, the months spent waiting for tenants, or the stress of carrying 2, 3, 4 mortgages while you're trying to refinance. The reality is that every BRRRR deal is unique, and small mistakes can snowball quickly. Plus, mistakes don't make for good content online when you're trying to sell a course, right? Anyways, one of the biggest misconceptions is that anyone can jump into BRRRR with minimal effort or cash. The thing is, the strategy actually demands careful planning, solid financial analysis, and a willingness to manage risk. It's not about just finding a cheap house or fixing it up. You need to know your numbers, understand the market, and have backup plans for when things go sideways, not if. Here's how a deal can go wrong: underestimating repair costs, overestimating the after repair value, or assuming you will not have any trouble refinancing. Any of these mistakes can create a domino effect that throws off your entire plan. Even experienced investors can get caught up and caught by surprise, but beginners are especially vulnerable because they don't have the experience or reserves to weather setbacks. So one mistake can take you from BRRRR to broke. So while the BRRRR method can absolutely work, it's not a guaranteed path to wealth. The strategy rewards those who are prepared, disciplined, and realistic about the risks. Believe it or not, the majority of people fail with the BRRRR method, but not because it's a bad strategy. The real problem? Well, the hurdle in BRRRR isn't the concept, it's the numbers. Most investors, especially beginners, get tripped up by one critical mistake: miscalculating the financials at every step. This usually starts with a renovation budget. It is easy to look at a property and think you can handle the rehab for less than it actually costs, especially when you're not experienced. You might walk through, make a list, and feel confident in your $30,000 estimate, but once the walls are open, surprises start popping up like old wiring, water damage, foundation issues, or worst of all, mold throughout the house. Suddenly your $30,000 estimate is going to jump up to $50,000 and now you're scrambling for money. Experts at Bankrate recommend adding at least a 10 to 20% cushion to your rehab plan because unexpected problems are almost guaranteed. If you skip this buffer, you're already setting yourself up for trouble before you even get to the refinance step where you get your money back. Then comes the after repair value, or ARV as some of us call it. This number drives your entire deal because it determines how much you can borrow when you refinance. The mistake here is overestimating what your property will be worth after renovations. Maybe you see similar homes in the neighborhood selling for top dollar, so you assume yours will too, but unless your property matches those comps in size, condition, and features, lenders and appraisers are not going to agree. If you're too optimistic about the ARV, you could find yourself unable to pull out enough cash to cover your investment, and now you're stuck in a hole. That's where the 70% rule comes in handy. Don't pay more than 70% of the ARV minus repair costs. It gives you a cushion for both the rehab and the refinance. Financing is the next big challenge. The BRRRR method relies on your ability to refinance to get your cash back out, but lenders have strict requirements. On an investment property, most will only let you refinance up to 75% of the property's appraised value, so you'll need to have at least 25% equity in the property. There's also usually a seasoning period, typically 6 months, before you can even apply for a cash out refinancing. If your property appraises for less than you hoped, or if you're over leveraged, which is the worst case scenario, because you're underestimated costs, you might not qualify for the amount that you need. Overestimating ARV and undercapitalizing reserves can block your refinance, so plan for both, or you could end up stuck with your cash tied up in the property and no way to move forward. Let's look at a real-world example. Picture an investor who buys a property for $160,000 and budgets $30,000 for renovations. As the work progresses, the costs climb to $35,000. Now the investor expects the ARV to be $250,000, but the appraisal comes in at $230,000. When it's time to refinance, the lender caps the loan at 75% of the new value, so the investor can only borrow $172,500. That's not enough to cover the purchase, rehab, and closing costs. On top of that, the project took longer than expected, so the holding costs like the insurance and the utilities and the mortgage payment eat into the profit even more. Now, instead of having cash to roll into the next deal, the investor is forced to dip into personal savings just to close the gap. It's not just beginners who make these mistakes though. Experienced investors can get caught if they stretch themselves too thin or try to force the numbers to work. But the risks are bigger for those without experience or extra funds to fall back on, because a single miscalculation can delay your whole plan, drain your savings, or even put you at risk of missing payments if the property doesn't rent as quickly as you hope. The bottom line is that BRRRR isn't a shortcut, it's a strategy that requires careful, realistic financial planning at every stage. You need to be conservative with your estimates, build in buffers, and always have a backup plan. The investors who succeed with BRRRR aren't just lucky, they're disciplined, detail-oriented, and honest to themselves about the risks and the rewards. If you want BRRRR to work out for you, it's not about finding a magic formula or jumping on a trend. It's about being prepared, staying grounded, and knowing exactly what you're getting into before you start. You have to take the emotions out of the transaction. So what we need to do is master costs, vet ARV, and lock in lifelines. Then BRRRR can build real wealth. Each stage of the strategy needs careful attention, from budgeting for repairs to screening tenants and understanding your refinance options. Those who succeed aren't chasing shortcuts. They're putting in the work to make sure that every number adds up. It's not a shortcut, but for those who prepare, it's a proven route to ownership and income and building an investment portfolio. If you're serious about BRRRR, commit to conservative budgeting and lean on professionals before the first refinance. With patience and diligence, you can avoid the biggest pitfalls and set yourself up for long-term success and hopefully wealth. If this video helped, click that subscribe button. I'll be releasing more financial and real estate content every week.